Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. You may know I've been eating low carb, and I've been experimenting on recipes that will fit into a keto way of eating. And in this video, I'm going to show you dumplings. Now, I've made chicken and dumplings, but I'm just going to show you how to make the dumplings. Let me remind you, if you like our videos, give us a thumbs up, please. And subscribe, and if you click the little bell at the top right, you'll get a notice when I post new videos. Now let's get cooking. And here are my ingredients. And you know, you have to really be careful when you say something is keto, because it may be and it may not be. It depends on everything else you eat. So I'm using 1 cup of CarbQuick and 1/4 cup of Vital Wheat Gluten. Now, the CarbQuick has 6 net grams of carbs per cup, and the Vital Wheat Gluten has 4 per 1/4 cup, and that's net grams. It has a lot. The CarbQuick has a lot of fiber. Now, I've got a mixture here that I call my dusting mix, and it's the same proportions: 1 cup CarbQuick to 1/4 cup Vital Wheat Gluten. And I have 2 eggs, and then I have some water here, and I'm going to use probably 1 tablespoonful. That can vary based on the humidity, the weather. And I have my food processor here, and I think you must use a food processor. The dusting mix has already been mixed up in the food processor. So I'm adding my 1 cup of CarbQuick. And let me rephrase, it's not that you must use a food processor, it's that you get a better results if you do. CarbQuick is a very rough feeling substance, and you can't sift it. So if you put it in the food processor with the Vital Wheat Gluten, you're mixing them together and you're breaking it down just a little bit so that you have a little bit finer texture. None of the recipes for CarbQuick that I've seen from the company actually call for a food processor. It's just something I've tried, and I like the results better. So that's just my take on it. If you don't have a food processor, go ahead without it. Now I'm adding about an 1/8 of a teaspoonful of salt, and that's really to taste. The CarbQuick also doesn't have a lot of flavor, so be sure to add some salt, even though I believe it does have some salt in it. So now I'm going to beat this together, process it for a good long time, 15-20 seconds, to mix it well and to break down some of the little lumps in the CarbQuick. Gives you more of a flour texture. I like CarbQuick. I find it to be much more versatile than other low-carb flours, but don't be fooled, it isn't flour. It doesn't taste exactly like flour, and it doesn't act exactly like flour. It's just closer than any other low-carb flour I've tried. Now here are my 2 eggs, and I'm going to put them in. I'm going to work really hard not to spill them. And I'm going to mix that together until I get a mixture that is kind of rough and pebbly. And I'm going to show you, well, I can't get that off. I'll just carefully reach in. So here is what you get. It's kind of moist, kind of rough. So we're going to add just a little bit of water. I've got just a little bit of dryness still around the bottom. Don't add too much water. And if you get a good mixture without the water, just leave the water out. This is probably a good point for me to tell you. You could also, if you're making chicken and dumplings, add a tablespoonful of chicken broth instead of the water. And the other thing you can do that I recommend, I didn't in this one, but you can. See, I've picked up that little bit of dryness there with that little bit of water. Add spices to your dry mix. If you're making chicken and dumplings, you may want to add sage or thyme. maybe a little onion powder, a little garlic powder, just a touch. And this is the texture you're looking for. Let's take the next step. We want to turn this out now. I'm using my Silpat pie sheet here, and I'm going to dust it with a little bit of this dusting powder. I'll use some of this dusting powder all along here, and I'll give you the calculations. It's going to be an approximate calculation. I'm going to figure that all together we're going to use about 1/4 cup of the dusting mix, and I'll add that into the carb count calculation. So let's turn this out. You can see the texture we've got. As you're learning to work with CarbQuick, let me give you a warning. Less water is better. You may think something is too dry, then you go to cook it and it swells up into a big puffy mess. So I'm very careful with the amount of water I add. That's why I only added 1 tablespoon. So I'm going to work this a little bit, and yes, I'm kind of kneading it. I have wheat gluten in there, and I want it to be activated to help hold everything together when you put it in the water. I don't know if you've tried to make dumplings or pasta before with other kinds of flour or fiber, like oat fiber or coconut flour and added cream cheese, and they look pretty good, and you put them in the pan and they fall all to pieces. Well, this mixture won't do that, and that's partially because of the wheat gluten. I'm going to cover this little bowl and put this all in the refrigerator for a couple hours, or you could do it overnight. You could make your dough the night before and then refrigerate it, but don't skip the refrigeration step. It's very important. I'll be back. It's been a couple hours. I have my Silpat sheet here and about 1/4 cup of the dusting mix. And I'm going to put this dough out here, and I'll work a little bit of the dusting mix in. I'm going to knead it some, and that's partially to warm it up and partially to work a little bit more of the dusting mix in to get a stiff texture, and you want no stickiness at all. So we'll work in enough of the dusting mix to make sure there's no stickiness. Now this is just easier to work if you cut it in half. I know this is not a huge recipe here, but this gets very stiff, and getting it as thin as possible is important. So I just find it works better to cut it in half before you roll it. It's just easier to work with that way. And you know, you could make a double recipe of this if you were making a great big pot. But I'll tell you, even though this looks like a small amount of dough for dumplings, I'm making it'll be about 3 quarts altogether of dumplings with the chicken and everything. And this is almost too much because this swells up a lot. So the thinner the better. And I'm just going to start rolling this. I won't make you watch the whole thing. I'll just give you an idea of how it works. And it feels, as you're working it, almost like pie crust. It's about that texture. Maybe just a little, I don't know, a little stiffer. But it works very easily. And I will tell you, you can just run this through a pasta roller if you want to. You would get it thinner in a pasta roller, and that might be better. I just didn't want to have to get that whole thing out and work it and then wash it, and so I'm just rolling it out with my rolling pin. And I'm going to roll this a little bit, and then I'll be back. This took about 2 or 3 minutes. It's very easy to roll and work with, and I got it pretty thin. Here, I'll show you. You could get it a little bit thinner with a pasta roller, but it's dumplings and not noodles, so a little puffiness is okay. Now we're going to cut this. I don't want to use a knife here on my Silpat mat, So I'm just going to use this bench scraper. If you have a pasta roller, a pizza cutter, that would work just fine. And I'm just going to cut this into fairly small strips, just however you like your dumplings. You can cut them in squares, you can cut them in strips. I'm going to cut on this a minute and I'll be right back. Just about done here. You can see that I'm cutting the longer strips in half. And this dough is very sturdy, very sturdy. You can tell that it's not going to fall apart when you put it in the water. Have you done that? Oh, that's just so disheartening. Put it in the water and it just comes apart. This is about how many you get from half. I'm going to go ahead and work this and knead it a little bit and cut it. And then we'll be ready to cook. All done. They've all been cut. I'll give you an idea here of how much you have. You'll have easily double that once they cook. Let me just sort of show you the elasticity we have here. See this? See how sturdy that is? You can pull it. It'll stretch and pop back. That's what the gluten does. This is how much of the dusting mix we have left from a 1/4 cup. Now for the moment of truth. I have my chicken and dumplings here, or have my chicken part here. And just use your chicken and dumpling recipe. I also have a video for how to make chicken and dumplings. Everybody's is different. I'm sure you make it like your mama made it or your grandma. But this is mine. I do add just a little bit of vegetables to mine. About 3 grams worth, by the way. Little carrot, onion, and celery. And chicken broth. And I have it at a simmer. And I'm going to start dropping these dumplings in. And you can tell right away that they're going to stay together. So I just add them slowly. And you can see them start to swell up. I'm doing a little time lapse here. My pot's getting pretty full. You do want to add them 1 or 2 at a time though, because if you add them all at once, it just takes the temperature down and they don't get cooked enough before they all stick together. So if you add them 1 at a time, they don't stick together. I'm going to do a little more time lapse here. And the pot's getting really full, so I'm going to use my spoon to move them over a little bit. I've almost got them all in. And you know, I probably could have done with a little bit fewer dumplings in here, but it's chicken and dumplings, and I like to have a lot of dumplings in my chicken and dumplings. I think we've just about got them. So they're all in. I'm going to put a little weight on this, press them down, because they all float. And set my timer for 7 minutes to make sure that they get done all the way through, and then I'll be back. And after 7 minutes, I'll show you what we've got. I want you to look at the texture of these dumplings. They're nice and puffy like dumplings. They all stay together. They smell wonderful. You know I love chicken and dumplings. That's a childhood comfort food. Let me grab a spoon over here. I'm going to give the broth a little taste, just to make sure I've got enough salt, and I'm pretty sure that I do. Hot. Very hot. And it's just right. You know, chicken's pretty easy to get too salty, but this is just fine. I'm going to plate this up, and then I'll show you what we got. I want to share with you guys, I had to get a new camera. So I'm just trying to figure it out. I think it's going to work fine. But here are our chicken and dumplings, and I'm going to get a little taste of that broth there. And I want to cut these dumplings to let you see them. Now, hold in mind, CarbQuick is not flour. These are not exactly the same as dumplings you would make with flour, but they're pretty darn close. Couple of points. Do use the seasoning in the dry mix. But CarbQuick itself doesn't have a lot of flavor. It soaks up the flavor of the chicken broth, but it's not very highly flavored. So if you want to add some thyme or some sage or some garlic or some onion, anything like that, any dry spices, it's just going to enhance the flavor. All in all, if you're eating low carb and you're craving dumplings and pasta, this is very good and very close to the original. And just so you know, I'm not a CarbQuick spokesperson. I don't get paid anything for giving you my opinion. But if you're eating low carb and you miss the texture and the mouthfeel of items made with flour, this is about as close as you're going to get. I hope you like this recipe. I hope you try it. And I hope to see you again tomorrow.